They say the devil watches those who call his name.
Hello, guys. Welcome to the dark side.
They say the devil watches those who call his name. And one night, someone dared to test it. It was a night thick with shadows, the moon hidden behind dark, restless clouds. The air was heavy, as though the earth itself held its breath. In a decrepit house at the edge of a forgotten town, a group of 5 dared to summon the devil. For them, it was a game, a drunken challenge whispered at a party. But the air shifted the moment the first word was spoken. The leader, a young man named Marcus, stood at the center of the room. The others circled around him, holding candles whose flames flickered unnaturally. They had drawn the sigil on the floor with chalk, its intricate design too perfect for amateurs. Marcus claimed he had found it in an old, rotting book in a second-hand shop. The book's pages smelled of decay, and its ink felt almost wet to the touch. None of them questioned how he got it. They only wanted the thrill. "Are you sure about this?" Lydia asked, her voice trembling. The room already felt wrong, the air heavier than it should be. Marcus smirked, though there was a nervous edge to it. "It's just a ritual. Nothing will happen unless we believe it will." They arranged themselves around the sigil. Marcus began to read aloud from the book, his voice low and wavering. The words were foreign, guttural, and harsh. As he spoke, the temperature in the room plummeted. Their breath became visible in the dim light, and the candles sputtered violently. The others joined in, chanting the name Marcus had written on a scrap of paper and handed to each of them. "Azrathal," they called, the name heavy on their tongues, wrong in a way they couldn't describe. The sigil on the floor began to glow faintly, the lines pulsing with a sickly red light. The house creaked as though it were alive, the sound deep and mournful. A rotten smell filled the air, sharp and choking, like decayed flesh left out in the sun. Lydia gagged, covering her mouth with her hand. "What's that smell?" No one answered. The candles flickered wildly before going out all at once, plunging the room into darkness. The glow of the sigil grew brighter, casting eerie shadows on the walls. One of the boys, Ethan, swore under his breath. "This is messed up, man. Let's stop." But Marcus kept chanting, his voice growing louder, more insistent. The shadows on the walls began to move, twisting and writhing like living things. The room filled with a low hum, a vibration that rattled their teeth and made their heads ache. Then, the lights began to flicker. The old bulbs buzzed and popped, showering the floor with sparks. The hum grew louder, almost deafening, and a deep guttural growl echoed through the room. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. It was something far worse. "Marcus, stop!" Lydia screamed, grabbing his arm. But he shrugged her off, his eyes wild with a mix of fear and exhilaration. The sigil burned brighter, the heat searing their skin. The shadows stretched toward them, long, spindly limbs that seemed to reach from the walls and floor. A gust of wind tore through the room, slamming the door shut. The windows rattled violently, and the stench of sulfur grew overwhelming. Lydia screamed as she felt something cold and wet brush against her neck. Ethan fell to his knees, sobbing, his hands pressed to his ears as the hum turned into a chorus of whispers. The voices were everywhere, speaking in a language none of them could understand. And then, silence. For a moment, the group was frozen, their eyes darting around the room. The sigil stopped glowing. The room plunged into an oppressive, unnatural darkness. But the feeling of being watched was unbearable. Something was there, in the shadows, its presence suffocating. Marcus's voice shook as he whispered, "Did it work?" A single candle reignited, its flame weak and trembling. It illuminated Marcus's face, pale and drenched in sweat. Then, one by one, the other candles burst back to life, their flames unnaturally tall and blue. The shadows around them grew thicker, darker, moving closer. Ethan suddenly went still. His breathing stopped, and his head snapped up unnaturally fast. His eyes rolled back, showing only the whites, and his mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. "Azrathal," he whispered. His voice layered with something deep and unearthly. His body began to convulse, his limbs jerking as though pulled by invisible strings. He grabbed a shard of glass from the broken window, his hand bleeding as he clenched it. Without hesitation, he drove it into his throat, dragging it across in a slow, deliberate motion. Blood sprayed across the room as the others screamed, frozen in horror. Lydia backed away, her hands trembling. What's happening? What's wrong with him? Before anyone could answer, another boy, Ryan, collapsed to the floor. His body arched upward, his back bending at an impossible angle. His skin turned ashen, veins darkening and spreading like cracks. When he stood, his face was barely recognizable, his jaw unhinged and his eyes burning with an unnatural red light. Ryan let out a guttural laugh, his hands clawing at his own face. He tore at his skin, ripping it away in strips until his skull gleamed beneath the blood. His laughter echoed in the room as he fell lifeless to the floor. The shadows moved again, coiling around Lydia. She screamed as they entered her mouth and eyes, her body stiffening as if she had been struck by lightning. Her head twisted unnaturally, her neck cracking as her face contorted into a hideous grin. She grabbed one of the candles and poured the molten wax onto her skin, her flesh sizzling and bubbling. She didn't stop until her body collapsed, smoke rising from her burned remains. Marcus was the last. He tried to run, but the sigil on the floor ignited again, trapping him in place. The shadows enveloped him, and his screams were cut short as his body began to twist and contort. His bones snapped audibly, his limbs bending backward. When he turned to face Alex, his eyes glowed with the same fiery red, and his mouth stretched wide, splitting the skin of his cheeks. "Run," Marcus rasped, his voice barely human. Alex didn't hesitate. He bolted for the door, which flew open just as he reached it. Behind him, the house filled with the sound of laughter, deep, echoing, and malicious. He didn't stop running, even as the house seemed to collapse inward, the shadows swallowing it whole. Now, Alex tells the story to the police. His eyes are hollow, his voice shaking as he recounts the night he lost his friends. He warns anyone who will listen. Don't call his name. Don't even think about it. Azrathal is always watching, waiting for someone foolish enough to summon him. The devil doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. He takes you, body and soul, and makes you destroy yourself. And if you're unlucky enough to call his name, he'll answer. If you enjoyed this chilling tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring more terrifying stories to life. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a nightmare, because the darkness is always watching.